Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the Liszt List, Essential Works for Beginners. This was a lot of fun to do, I have to say, because Liszt, the more you listen to him, is fascinating. Now, if people tell you that Liszt is trash, like I have, ignore them. There is tons of fabulous music to listen to, and he wrote so much of it. The most fascinating thing for me about Liszt, and we'll get to this, is the fact that so much of his music exists in so many versions. Liszt was the greatest improviser that ever lived, probably after Bach. Bach also could improvise like, anything. But Liszt was amazing that way too. And Liszt improvised on paper. In other words, he would take a work, then he'd return to it and recast it or diddle it or something. And so most of his music exists in multiple versions. And the differences are not a question of this is better than that. They're just different. And the differences all are sort of part and parcel of what the work is. In other words, it's an additive experience. You know one version, then you listen to another version, then you listen to another version. All of them are sort of triangulating or homing in on the initial concept around which all of these sometimes extremely varied and highly different versions crystallized. It's a remarkable legacy. It really is. And you're going to hear that yourself because, fortunately, a lot of these works exist in versions for piano and versions for orchestra. And you can listen to both and you can compare them. And that's a lot of the fun with Liszt. It's not just that they're delicious all by themselves, and they are. They're really fun to hear in these multiple different versions. So let's start. Let's start with his most popular piece, probably his Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, the one you saw in cartoons. Dun dun da 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 da. Then it goes. This exists in the piano original. And, well, there's actually a couple piano originals, but Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 is one of the piano originals, and it's the one we all know. And then it was orchestrated by Liszt and by others. So there are several different versions for orchestra. Doesn't matter which one you pick. It's really a piano work, and I personally feel that the piano version is much more successful and interesting than the orchestral version because you hear, first of all, the harmonies in a more balanced way because they're all in the same plane of tone. And also, the music is just so pianistic. You want to hear the virtuosity, that excitement of someone doing it all on a keyboard that I think gives it such a thrill. But if you like the orchestral versions, there's nothing wrong with that. So give it a go, and you'll see what I mean right away by the nature of Liszt's music being constantly in flux, always fluid. There is no definitive form or shape to a lot of these pieces, but they're full of ideas. And each version explores those ideas somewhat differently. So after that, we have another piece that exists in multiple versions, the Mephisto Waltz No. 1. Now, Mephisto, of course, is the devil. And, Liszt had this demonic side. He was constantly trying to become a priest, and his family was constantly talking him out of it. And so there is this sacred religious side, the heaven side, and the hell side, the demonic, crazy, sort of in your face, exciting side. And the Mephisto Waltz No. 1 is absolutely one of the great virtuoso piano pieces in the history of the universe. It's so much fun. It really is. And you give it a shot, hear the piano version, and then listen to the orchestral version. Again, the piano version, I think, has it all over the orchestral one, only because that element of virtuosity is so much part of Liszt's musical physiognomy. And when you play it on an orchestra and you make it easy for the various sections to do the various tunes, you take something away. You're adding color, you're adding weight, you're adding impact. Some people may well prefer that. But I want to hear one person struggle with this sucker. I really do. And you may disagree, so it's entirely up to you. Now we do something which actually is basically just an orchestral work with piano, is Piano Concerto No. 1. Famous piece. I used to hate this piece, I have to say, because the opening tune is da 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 dum ba da like that. And every time you hear dum, ba da 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 dum, you always hear da da. And I was always waiting for the da da, and it was driving me nuts. Oh, it made me crazy. It's like, why can't he just play it without the da da a few times, or more frequently, so you don't know, to make it more interesting, because it's not always what's expected. Well, that wasn't the way Liszt thought about it, and so you have to get past that. I did anyway, and once I got past it, it is a delightful piece. It's all in one movement. But the one movement has all the regular other movements in it. It has a slow movement, which is lovely. It has a delightful little scherzo, a little jokey dance piece with a solo triangle, which caused people to laugh at the work when it was first performed. I think it was around the 1840s or somewhere in there. People thought it was something to be ridiculed. A percussion solo, a little triangle going ding ding ding. And Liszt was very insistent upon it. He wanted a good-sounding triangle. He didn't want a dinner bell that went clang, crash, like those things. So it's lots of fun. And at the end, we hear a tune, da-da-dum, bom, ba, da-dum, bom, which Mahler filched in the first movement of his Sixth Symphony, which he admitted, by the way. So that's interesting. It's all kinds of fun stuff. The end is a march, and it's a delightful march with cymbals and triangle, and it's a wonderful piece. It's only about 20 minutes long. It's short. So it's compact, and it's very, very exciting and fabulous for the soloist. And just give it a shot. You're going to love it. Sit down and let it just happen. So after the piano concerto, well, let's do some of his most famous piano works after the Hungarian Rhapsody. First, the Liebesträume. Liebestraum is the singular. Liebesträume is the plural. It means love dream. Now, these are also arrangements, believe it or not. They're known almost entirely as solo piano pieces, but actually each of them is an arrangement of a song. And you can find the songs if you really want to do your homework. They're songs by Liszt. I mean, songs that Liszt wrote and that he later arranged as piano solos. And the love dreams are very beautiful and lyrical and elegiac and sad and luscious. And oh my goodness, it's beautiful stuff. Just they're nocturnal pieces. Although Chopin invented those basically along with John Field, the Scottish composer, or Irish composer, pardon me. And there you have it. So the three Liebesträume, which if you want to go and do the research and find the songs, you can. It is actually fun to check out the words that Liszt had been setting the music to, and then listen without the words and see how well you think the music, evokes the spirit of the words, not literal words, I mean, how do you make music do and? Like, I love you, and, well, okay. So you get the point, right? Then we have another demonic piece, Totentanz, Dance of Death, for piano and orchestra. This is a set of variations on the Dies Irae, the Gregorian chant, the Day of Wrath, the tune that everybody used, Berlioz and Rachmaninoff, and you name it, they used it. It's da 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 dum da 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 dum. But this is just fun. This is a piece that it has no purpose other than to just have a great time. It's incredibly brilliant. The variations are lots of fun to hear. The end is beyond thrilling. It also exists in a version for solo piano if you care, but you really got to hear the version with orchestra. In this case, the version with orchestra is much more fun than the version for solo piano, I think, because they're alternating with each other. It's not a piano piece where all the piano music has to be subsumed somehow into a less interesting orchestral version. Here, both of them strut their stuff as equals, and that's what makes it so much fun, because the variation form is sectional. You have variation 1, variation 2, variation 3 now, and so it gives each participant, the soloist and the orchestra, a chance to make a statement, and state they do. Oh boy, is that fun. So let's see, what else have we got here? Oh yes, one of the amazing things about Liszt is that he spent most of his life writing music based on tunes by other people. That includes the Hungarian Rhapsodies, but mostly his greatest hits, fantasies, and reminiscences, and other things of of operas. Lots and lots of operas. Operas by everybody, by Verdi, by Wagner, by Bellini, by Donizetti, by Berlioz, by all the most famous people who wrote operas that possibly had a tune, Liszt used. And he used them to create these piano extravaganzas based on these tunes. And one of the very, very greatest is Réminiscences de Don Juan. It's called in French, but it's actually Fantasy for piano after Mozart's Don Giovanni. This is one of his greatest opera potpourri tunes. If you know the Mozart opera, you will recognize all the tunes, but they are assembled in a brilliant fashion, not necessarily in the order that they occur in the opera, not necessarily doing the things that they do in the opera. It's an independent work based on these themes, and it's big. I mean, it's almost 20 minutes long, I think, 17, 18 minutes. It's a big single movement extravaganza with piano pyrotechnics galore, but it's also a very clever and intelligent arrangement of these various themes. And so if you start to like other things, operas, he arranged all the Beethoven symphonies, all of them for piano solo. He was an amazing arranger of other people's music, and he was an amazing creator, taking these tunes and making something completely new out of them. And this is one of the great examples. So give it a shot, and I think you'll really be impressed. It's a wow kind of piece. I mean, absolutely amazing. And so after that, Mazeppa. Now, one of the things Liszt invented was the symphonic poem, which was supposed to be, theoretically, a single movement piece based on a theme which is transformed throughout the work into very different emotional states. Now, you might say, well, that sounds like a development section of a symphony, and it is, except the development part is the sort of whole idea of the symphonic poem, formally speaking. The development section of the symphony is one section. It's one part in a larger whole, something called sonata form. Whereas Liszt's symphonic poems are about the main idea and the different things he can do with it along the way. They don't have the same kind of forward momentum and goal sort of direction that symphonies do. They're based, most of them, on some kind of external program, an external idea which governs the different moods that, the themes are going to take. But it's still, he did them very well. There are 12 sort of in a bunch that he wrote all at once, and then a couple others that came later. But Mazeppa, it's about a Cossack. He's a Cossack, and he gets caught, and they kill him, and he gets dragged by a horse. And so there's a lot of galloping, and some really good tunes as well. It's just great. Anyway, this exists. Originally, it existed as one of his 12 transcendental etudes. Transcendental doesn't mean like God and spirituality. It means unbelievably extreme technique. These were works that were supposed to be the piano equivalent of Paganini's caprices and other violin pieces, things that stretched the technique of the instrument and that only people who were beyond human could play them. And one of these is called Mazeppa. So it's an etude. In other words, it's a study, a technical study in piano virtuosity on the one hand, but it also tells a story. And so later, Liszt went back to the idea and the themes that were part of this etude, and he blew it up into a big orchestral symphonic poem that's quite a bit longer and more involved. And it's just wonderful either way. But they're very different works. Even though the tunes are the same, and even the rhythms are somewhat the same, you have to compare them. And one serves its purpose as a virtuoso piano piece very, very well. The other is a very satisfying orchestral tone poem full of heroics and violence and excitement and charging rhythms. It's just marvelous. So there's Mazeppa. Then, let's see, another piano work, and this remained a piano work. Après une lecture de Dante. Dante, actually, if you want to put it that way. Sonata Quasi, it's Fantasia Quasi Sonata. There we go. Let me get it right. So it's after reading Dante. Now, you remember Dante, right? He wrote the Inferno. and the Paradiso and the Purgatorio. It's the Divine Comedy, the entire work it's called. And so it spends a lot of time in hell. That's the juicy bit. And so Liszt wrote a almost piano sonata, he calls it. It's in one movement in multiple sections that is based on his reading of Dante. So you're going to have the elements of Dante. He wrote a symphony, by the way, a Dante symphony that's also based on those ideas, but it begins with hell. Of course, you're going to start in hell, and it's supposed to work its way up, to heaven, to the transcendental, and it represents these polar opposites in the course of the work. It's a very, very famous piece. It comes from a big cycle of piano works called Années de Pèlerinage, Years of Pilgrimage, which Liszt wrote when he was hanging out with his mistress, and they were running around Europe in various places, dropping a kid here and there along the way. They did. His son Daniel was almost starved to death because they just left him in Italy with a wet nurse who didn't feel like feeding him. And when they got him, he was pretty close to being like dead. They had 3 kids actually, all told. And there are 3 years of pilgrimage. Not that they had 1 kid in each, but they are Italy and Switzerland. Well, it starts in Switzerland, Swiss, and then Italy, and then like other places, various other places. And it's a wonderful series of pieces. All of these are poetic images and fascinating works that are based on inspiration that Liszt took on his travels. So you can look at the whole set if you want. It's like 3 discs of stuff, or you can just listen to bits of it. And the Dante Sonata, as it's come to be known, is one of the very greatest of those. And then, let's see, another symphonic poem. Let's do, why don't we? Les Préludes. That's the most famous of all of his poems. It's probably the most famous because it doesn't mean anything. In other words, the idea is like life is but a prelude to something. It's a philosophical piece. A lot of Liszt's symphonic poems, some of them like Mazeppa, tell an actual story, but just as many of them are more about moods and emotions and contemplations of the beyond. Ooh, things like that. And Les Préludes is that. It's the most famous of all of them, and it's got a tune that we've all heard. Da ba ba da, da dum bum 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 ba. It starts out sort of gloomily, and then it has echoes of the heroism to come, and then there's a sort of slowish, beautiful spiritual part, and then a vigorous, heroic march ending. And it's just delicious. I've played it several times. It's a lot of fun to do. It's about 15 minutes long, and it's quite lovable. And last but not least, certainly not least, another work that exists, it's been orchestrated, but forget that, only as a piano work, and it's Liszt's arguably his greatest piano work, the Sonata in B minor. He only wrote 1 real piano sonata, and it cost him a huge amount of work. It's a piece that has multiple sections. It's all in one long movement, 30 minutes long. This is not an easy piece to wrap your brain around. It really isn't. But it's brilliantly structured, wonderfully put together. And it's based, like his tone poems, on just a couple very, very simple ideas, which are constantly being transformed. It's almost unplayable. It was, at least Liszt had a hard time with it. And so has just about everyone else since. It's a very, very difficult work, both intellectually, because he doesn't tell you anything about what it means. There are no secret little, side hoogie-googies or stories or anything that goes with it. It's a completely abstract work based on varying emotional states as represented by a few very, very basic tunes. And it's an extraordinary piece of music. And once you've gotten used to the idea of how Liszt operates in transforming themes and recasting things in various ways, you won't have any problem listening to the B minor sonata. It's just a question of length. You have to have the patience to be able to sit through 30 minutes of continuous piano music, which is fascinating. It's not like it has dead spots, or it shouldn't in a great performance. But that's up to you. It depends on your own attention span. I think Liszt sustains the whole thing magnificently, and all of the greatest pianists in the universe have tried to play this thing, and there are many, many great recordings which you can take a look. I've done videos about it, and there are wonderful reviews at classicstoday.com so that you can choose the one that's going to suit you best. So there you have it, my friends, a Liszt list, a way to get into his special sound world. It takes patience, it takes time, as all these composers do, but it's really worth it. I mean, it's so interesting. Nobody is anything like this guy. Nothing at all. He was one of the true musical visionaries of the 19th century. And once you've gotten this stuff under your belt, there's a whole universe out there just waiting for you to discover. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.